And hello and welcome. My name is Martin, and in today's video what we're going to do is apply the damage code to other objects, other enemy characters. In the previous video what we did was we attached it to the stationary mine, so let's just go in quickly and see how that is being affected. We figured out that the problem that we have is that when we shoot the ammunition, obviously our health bar goes down as well. So we will need to do a couple of things in this video. First, we're going to get rid of that problem, and then secondly, we will address the issue of applying it, let's say, to the homing missile. And if this doesn't get too long, hopefully we'll be able to hit all the other things that may be causing us damage that are our enemy characters. So the first thing we're going to do is double click into the stationary mine, because it's this code is, there's nothing unique about it. There's no variables that we had to create. It's going to go to the first person character, so all we have to do is do a Control-C and we could copy that. And let's go to the homing missile, and inside the homing missile, this is very much the same code. The only difference was the respawning that we didn't have in the stationary mine. So I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to click there. I'm going to hit Control-V to paste that. And I'm just going to move it up so it's out of the way. Give it enough space. Connect that to there. And the output of that to here. Let's grab this. Bring it down so now it's in the correct order, and let's just double check and see what it's hitting. So in this case it's going to hit what's called the barrel. For us, that is the pencil. That's what we actually have there. We see it highlighted. I guess we should have changed the name to pencil rocket or whatever, but that's what it's going to be. So when it overlaps with the barrel, quote unquote, it's going to do the same type of damage. The only difference here is that let's make this only 10%, right? So every time we get hit by one of these, it's not as bad as the mine, and it's only going to take 10% out. So let's go ahead and hit compile and save. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to double check on the barrel and go down into its collision settings, and also make sure that it is overlapping with the pawn, and that it does generate the overlap effect. It should, because that's what we were using already to create the explosion. So if the missile was exploding when it contacted you, then all we did was put damage in there as well. So we've hit compile and save, and let's see if we can get this to work. So let's push play. So I'm going to walk over to where one of the missiles are. I'm going to allow it to hit me, and it did, I believe, how much damage? Did we say 10%? Okay. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to allow it to come back in on its own. I'm going to shoot it with the pawn, and we are still having the problem with the projectile. Okay, so the way that we're going to fix the projectile issue that we have so that it doesn't cause us damage is to create a collision setting around each one of the barrels that reacts to us, and when we run into it as the pawn, it causes the damage and then explodes, and that when we shoot it, that collision setting ignores the projectile, which we will then label as something else, but still causes the object to explode, right? Still causes the barrel to explode. In order to be able to do this, let's go ahead and do what we need to for the barrel first, and then we will fix the projectile for the first person character. And give it a different classification. So let's open up the barrel, and to do this for the barrel, essentially what we need to do is we need to have another set of instructions. At the moment it's set up to the barrel because that's the only that's the thing that we have that actually has a collision setting. So when we come over here to the right hand side under details, we see that it does have collision settings, and right now that information is set to where it is blocking everything except ignoring the pawn, right? Or, I'm sorry, overlapping the pawn, which is what we're doing here on the begin overlap, then, cause this to happen, right? So let us go ahead, and the part that we want to copy is going to be the part that's going to be back here on the back. So just everything after the damage. This part we can go ahead and keep. We are going to need to create a new variable since this is going to be caused by something else. We don't, the components are still the same. It just makes, trust me, it's better. Because it's creating this one instead of creating the other one, and it could be a problem. So we are copying everything after the sequence. We are going to find somewhere else down here, and we are going to Control V. And maybe I didn't do a Control C. So Control C, Control V. Okay, you'll see right there that we're getting that error message for the event. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. And the variable, we'll click off of the explosion, create the promote to variable. And in this case, we'll call it S-mine expo 2. Okay, so it's its own variable. With the variable selected, we're going to say on destroy. And then destroy actor. If I'm spelling stuff correctly. Yeah, I'm just going to click here. There it is. Okay, so now we have the back half ready. And basically what we need to do is we need to, like I said, we need to create a new barrier, a new collision setting. And actually this one, the barrel, we are going to disattach because we don't want the barrel causing us damage, because we want the barrel when the projectile hits it to explode. So I'm going to deselect it from here, say break, and we're going to attach this one just down here. Okay, so this is what's going to happen when the barrel itself is overlapped, right? And so there's not going to be any damage. So this could be anything that's overlapping that is assigned to be able to overlap with the barrel. Now, the only time we want it to cause us damage is when we run into it, right? So to do this, we're going to go to the viewport of the barrel. We're going to go to add component, and we're going to scroll down until we see a box collision. So basically, this is an invisible object that has collision settings. That'll allow us to be able to give it a new name and then assign it a task, which we already have. That's the event that we just took the other event from, or the code that we just took that other event from. Now, the only thing, obviously, we need to be able to actually run into this to be able to trigger it. So this box needs to be big enough for us to be able to run into it as a character. And it can't be inside the object, because if it's inside the object, our character will never bump into it, especially if the object is, it's blocking us from being able to get inside the object. The only thing we want to do is make sure that it's just a little bit bigger than the object itself. So, so long as we do that, we should be okay. And we now have our invisible object that goes around the outside. So what I'm going to call this is, I'm going to call it first person collision, because that's what we want. First person describing what's running into it and the fact that it's a collision box, right? So I'm going to right click on there. Let's go ahead and say rename, and let's call this FP for first person _ collision. Okay. Now we're going to reselect that. We're going to scroll down to its collision settings, and we are going to set this to, let's say, world dynamic. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to set it to custom settings. I'm going to leave query and physics on, so I need to make sure that both query and physics are turned on. I'm going to leave this as a world dynamic, and I'm going to let it ignore everything except for something labeled pawn, right? So now when the pawn runs into this, we will cause the explosion to happen. Now, the problem is that we still have the projectile named pawn. So we need to label the projectile something else and then make sure that that something else will overlap with the barrel. So the barrel now, we don't want that to be able to overlap with us. We want it to actually ignore the pawn. Let's actually see if that works. I don't think that's going to work, but let's see if that works. Let's hit save. Oh no, it's not going to work because this is still going with pawn. So we still need to rename the projectile. So to rename the projectile, I'm going to close that box, and I'm going to go to settings, and we're going to go to project settings. Inside project settings, we're going to scroll down into engine, and we're going to go down far enough to where we can see collision. Now inside collision, let me go ahead and delete this. You should see, yes, I know. You should see three options: object channel, trace channel, and then presets. Now the presets are all the different presets that we see underneath collision presets, and each one of these collision presets, if you open it up, has the ability to be able to set the different things for that preset. So if you wanted to make pawns all of a sudden do something other than what they were doing before and do that to everything that's labeled as a pawn, this would be the way that the preset is. So long as the preset that came in was pawn and not custom or anything else, you would get these options, right? So you don't have to set them up every time you need to call in an object. I'm going to hit cancel there. So what we need to do is we need to create a new object channel, a new name, a new team that we can then assign presets, those presets to, the collision presets to. So I'm going to go in here and type in or click on new object channel. And the object or the box that comes up gives me the ability to put in a name. So I'm going to call this projectile. FP, so first person, so FP underscore projectile. Okay. By default, I want it to, let's say, block everything. So then that way it's going to be bouncing because it's still a projectile, right? So I want it to be set up that way. So we're going to hit leave it as block. And what this means as far as the default response is, remember, there's already a bunch of presets. So those presets need to know how to be able to deal with this new team. And what you're doing by saying block is that you're going to make them automatically block this projectile. So everything that's already in the game that has collision settings now knows what to do with the new channel, the new team that you're putting out there. So let's go ahead and hit accept. Okay, so now that we have the projectile labeled correctly and it's got the correct collision name around the outside of it, the correct team that it's playing for, or what we would say object type. The next thing we need to do is actually go back into the stationary mine and finish out the code. So remember that we only have the event for one of these, which is just something overlapping with the barrel. So if something overlaps with the barrel, it will cause it to explode. What we want to do here is only when we run into the barrel does it cause us damage. So that's why we set up that additional first-person collision. We are going to have it selected, so when we right click, we get remember that you do need to have content sensitive on, and get add event collision. There is on begin overlap, so the minute that we run into this invisible collision box or invisible box with collision settings, we will then cause the first person character damage based on the code, plus the component itself. All the components they themselves explode. The only obvious thing here that we may end up doing is let's add the first person collision settings there, so then that way that also gets destroyed as well. So I'm going to do that for both pieces of the code. So then that way, when we're destroying the rest of it, that also, because that's something new that we added. Okay, so the last thing that we need to do is we need to check the collision settings themselves. So remember that the barrel is the static mesh. The static mesh has been told right here. So this is the barrel. See how it says barrel? So because it's the barrel, it's been told custom your world static. You're going to ignore the pawns, right? Because if yeah, we don't want it exploding. We don't want it exploding when we touch it. We want it exploding when we create this overlap, right? So we're going to get it to ignore the pawn, and we because we don't want it to block the pawn, we just want it to ignore the pawn. From there, we are going to get it to overlap with the new team that we created, right? So the first person projectile, so that when the projectile hits the barrel, it will cause it to explode. From there, with the first person collision, if we look at its collision settings, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the overlap is on. We want to make sure that this is a custom. And then from there, we want query and physics turned on. We want it labeled as a world dynamic. And what we want to do is we want it to ignore everything. We don't want anything else interacting with this invisible box except us, the pawn, right? So now that the first person projectile is labeled, oh, right, we actually need to go and label this as a first person projectile. Sorry about that. So we go to first person projectile. And for those that want to remember where that is, that's on contents, first person BP, blueprint, first person projectile. And for the collision component, right, similar to what we've done with the stationary mine, with that, we want to make sure that that actually blocks everything, right? So it's going to cause it to block, but we do want it to be labeled as this. So then that way, when it hits the stationary mine, it will automatically, because it's labeled, let's see, so the F collision is going to overlap, cause damage with the pawn, and the barrel is going to ignore the pawn and only blow up with the overlap, but there's no damage caused. So let's go ahead and hit compile and save and see if this now works. So let's push play. So theoretically, I should be able to hit this with, it did indeed destroy. There's nothing left and no damage happened to me. I'm going to walk into a barrel. It did cause me damage. Let's shoot, let's say we'll shoot one of these guys. Oh. So we haven't set up the ammunition for, so that's working, but we haven't told it how to deal with that new projectile, right? So we're going to have to add that code in for the homing missile as well. So let's go back to content. Let's go back to there. Let's go back to where our homing missile is. And we're going to have to do the same thing with the homing missile. We are going to need to generate a second half of this code, everything after sequence. So I'm just doing that so it's easier to copy. So Control C, Control V. Let's grab this and move it down. Obviously, we need a new name for those. So we're going to create a new variable. We're going to name that variable HMissile Explode 2. Okay, with it selected, we're going to create a new on destroyed. And then we're going to destroy that actor. at this point, I just, instead of looking for it, I'll just copy this one. Okay, just make sure that I have them both connected. All right, so from there, now what we'll have to do is the same thing with the homing missile, right? We'll have to create a collision box around it. So we'll create a collision box. We'll go to the viewport. We'll see what it looks like. It's quite large for the missile. We could tailor that maybe a little bit better. We can see that we might have a problem there if the missile gets to us first without the box hitting us. So let me make the box just a little bit longer. Let's make it a little bit flatter. And let's not make it so wide. Okay. So with that collision box, we should already have what we need here. So let's go and make it a custom. Okay, remember that the collision box, we want it to ignore everything except for the pawn. That's the only thing that's going to cause that explosion. Let's go back to the event graph. And the code that's got the explosion, that's the one that we want attached to the collision box. So I'm going to right click and break that one. We're going to attach that one to the bottom one. And I'm going to go ahead and just rename this. Just so that we know what it is, instead of just calling it box, we're going to say first person underscore collision. Okay, and then that way I know that that's the collision box that's around the homing missile and that it's responding to the first person as a collision. With it selected, we're going to right click, go to add event, collision, on begin overlap, add that to that code, and then just again make sure that it is the only thing that's interacting with us. We're going to go back to the barrel. With the barrel, remember that's the mesh. What I want to do is I want it to block everything except I want it to ignore the pawn, and I want it, so this is exactly the same thing that we did to the mine. All we did is the same, is attach, do it here. And then before we leave, we need to make sure that that is going to there. Okay, so with that completed, let's go ahead and compile and save. And this is only the homing missile 1. So we have the homing missile. Let's go ahead and push play. None of what we did should have affected the stationary mine. So you see that I get no damage. I walk into it, I'm still damaged. Last time we couldn't shoot this. We can now. I'm not sure if it gave me any damage. Let's shoot it again. I don't believe there was any damage. I'm gonna look at it one more time. Okay, no damage. Let me get in this path. And this time we should have damage. Okay, and I'm just going to stay there and take a couple of hits just so that we can see the bar move down. Okay, we definitely saw it move down that time. All right, so we now have fixed the problem that we had with the projectile causing damage every time it struck something that should have been causing only us damage when it ran into us and not when it ran into our projectile. And we've applied that not only to one of the homing missiles, which can now be copied over to all the other homing missiles, but we've also done it to the stationary mine. So in the last video, what we're going to do is we are going to look at the projectiles that the enemy characters are shooting at us, and we're going to get them to do the same thing where they are causing us damage, but they are not they do not cause damage when they bounce on something else. So that's the reverse problem that you have with the projectiles, is that if you attach damage code to them and they hit anything labeled as a pawn, then they could do the same thing. So you have to watch that. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.